Hi, welcome to our ongoing video series, ESG, Acronym to Action. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Ron Taylor. He's the CEO and Principal Strategist for Tailored Accessibility. And Ron, you're going to be talking to us today about the business case for accessibility. I want to start off by asking you, why do we need a business case for accessibility? I guess speaking from my own self, didn't even really realize that there is one. So I'm excited to learn, but also kind of a little bit concerned to what's the business case for accessibility.
Now, the reason that it's important to have the business case for accessibility is because most people consider it to be a social issue, not an economic one. Today, we're going to go through some of the reasons why we need to look at the economics of accessibility.
Okay.
And we'll get into more detail here shortly, but right now, accessibility is costing a considerable amount, and there are many steps that we can take to address that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's probably something I'd even say that I'd be guilty of is I don't necessarily think about the economic side of it. I think, yes, that this is a social issue, something we need to address. Looking forward to it. So off you go.
Okay. Before we get into things, it's important to understand what disability is. Now, the image behind us is a woman sitting in a wheelchair.
Right.
And that's what most people consider disability to be. An individual in a manual wheelchair. But it, of course, is much more than that. We have visual disabilities, hearing disabilities, mobility, flexibility, dexterity, pain, learning, developmental, mental and psychological, memory, and communication and speaking. So this engulfs a lot more disabilities than just that woman we saw sitting in a wheelchair.
Okay, and would it be safe to say then, like I'm thinking about, for instance, hearing, you wouldn't even necessarily know that a person has hearing disability, right? Or a big one obviously is mental illness. And the psychological side, no clue, right? They're getting coffee at the coffee station, they're in their desk doing their job.
Okay. Typically don't know until you start a conversation.
So what is, I see there aphasia, communication and speaking. So again, like that's not even, you hear about people with the speech impediment or whatever, but so explain that a little bit, because again, that's something, they look great, they're driving, parking in the parking spot, and you don't even think about that. So tell me what that's all about.
Sure. This is a disability that comes quite often with brain injuries or the result of a stroke where a person loses the ability to communicate clearly.
Okay.
Of course, the mental faculties are all in check. Everything's sharp, and the only issue is communicating thoughts and ideas with others.
Okay. So again, we may think, Fred maybe has a bit of a speech problem or whatever, but that's actually, it's a disability and we don't even think of it that way. Now I'm interested, you say that the mental faculties, so there's the flip, right? They're talking, they're doing presentations, they're doing everything else, while meanwhile the cogs upstairs mentally are falling apart at the seams, right? So that's kind of almost the flip. So the mental disability side that we don't even really see. So, okay, good.
Okay. So what are the numbers?
Wow.
With all of the various disabilities we've discussed, there's 3.8 million Canadians, that's 13.7% of the population, over the age of 15 reported having a disability. Now it's important in here to remember that this does not include children. They don't participate in the workforce.
Okay.
So the number is obviously quite higher than that. So that number is in fact projected to increase to 20 to 21% of people over the age of 15.
Wow.
By the year 2030.
So but I'm just thinking this out loud, and you said something very important. It doesn't include kids, and yet disability in children will or could have a direct impact on somebody's ability to work, on like a parent or a
Of course,
caregiver,
yes.
right? And so that's obviously going to have broad economic issues too. Those numbers are huge. So that's 20%. So I mean, roughly, you think about it, that's 6 million people by 2030. Let's use a population of about 30 million. You know, that's, wow, that's a huge number. And I'm going to take a guess it's going to increase by 2030, but it's probably going to
It's going to snowball for
right?
sure.
Okay.
So one of the contributors to this is what we call the silver tsunami. We touched on this in a previous video. Our baby boom generation is aging, and as of 2015, we were sitting with more Canadians that were 65 and over than there were of Canadians 15 and under. And the growth rate of the number of seniors is 4 times faster than the population at large, and outnumbering children by a ratio of 3 to 2 by 2035.
Wow. So it's 4x then, basically, on the increase in our senior population. You're right. We talked about that a little bit. You and I actually talked about that in some of the other videos. In the fact that we're just not making more babies, I guess, to keep up with the population growth that's happening on the senior side, and that's a huge chunk.
That's right. So 1 in 3 seniors over the age of 65 report having a disability.
So 30% to 33%.
Correct. And at the projected growth rate, by 2035, 3 million Canadian seniors will have a disability.
Do you think that incorporates the whole idea behind dementia, anorexia, whatever? Because the chances are that some of that may not even be being reported, right?
That's true. I mean, a lot.
I mean, 1 in 3 is bad enough, but
there's a lot that isn't reported or calculated in these statistics.
One thing I did want to ask you, and I was actually thinking about the last time. I live downtown, so I kind of get a real sense of this. And this is something that I see in aging people who are actually homeless, or they're not having at least a permanent address, and they're in downtown. What I do see, and it's interesting that you're bringing this up, is it seems to be that this population of people that are displaced are getting older, right? And they have, to me at least, not only do they have obviously mental disability and some of the psychological issues, they have definite physical disabilities. And I would imagine that statistic's not even being picked up in some of this, right, in terms of the homeless.
No, the homeless population is probably getting missed quite significantly, just in the fact that they don't have the address, they don't participate in the census.
Right.
And so those numbers are lost as well.
Wow. And that's going to have a huge impact, obviously, economically, right? Because at some point in time, even now, you have to pay for that care and healthcare and all the issues. But as they age, then it's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
Right?
And of course, these are numbers that we've been sounding the alarm bells over for a long period of time, is that, this is going to inundate our healthcare system, and because there's nowhere for these seniors to be housed. And we've been saying for many years now, we need to look at aging in place and accessible housing more seriously, because we're going to miss the boat, and there's going to be a lot of displaced seniors.
These numbers are huge.
They are.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, these people, with the current economic condition, are going to remain in the workforce considerably longer than they have historically. So this actually does tie into the economics quite considerably, because with the shift in population age, companies are going to have to bring more seniors into their workforce, out of supply and demand.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because Scotiabank, of course, had had the Freedom 55. It was a big thing. They had all the commercials and whatever. I've noticed very quietly that Freedom 55 has just seemed to sort of vanish from the consciousness, because we talk about runway, right? And we're in our 50s or whatever, and now they're saying, well, you've got a runway of still 20, 25 years or whatever, because you're right. We're not thinking that we're off to the golf course, getting our golf cart and sort of driving around, retiring at 55 or 60 years old anymore.
Not this guy.
That makes two of us. That's why we both have the gray hair.
So, persons with disabilities community is the largest minority group in the world, and it's not exclusive. Any one of us can join at any time. That could come from an accident. It could come from being born with a disability, or as we've covered, the simple act of aging. It's going to render many people with disabilities going into their later stages of life.
So we're not even talking about that. Like, I mean, for good reason, we talk about the impact of minority communities and what our response needs to be as a society and as a community. But that's I've never seen a commercial saying the largest minority group in the world is people with disability, and it's so logical, Ron. But like, I admit, it's not something I think of. This is a big deal, right?
It really is. I mean, people with disabilities are members of every community, whether it be an ethnic community, religious community. They belong to every community,
right?
And that's really an important thing to keep in mind when we look at minority groups, that they come from every walk of life.
Yeah. I guess we don't even think about that, right? So you've got a minority group that's already there's an issue, right? That's going to have to get dealt with. And inside of the minority group, now you have people with disabilities, which is going to be hard enough for us, let alone a minority community. Now you've got that problem within that community. I mean, it's a snowball, right? So I've never even thought about it in terms of this. It's an excellent slide, but it also makes you think, right? You do. You think about it all the time. That's why you have your company.
It's my job.
Right? Yeah, it's your job.
So we need to look at accessibility to include all of these members of our communities. So accessibility is achieved through the design of products, devices, technology, services, vehicles, or environments so as to be usable by people with disabilities. So when we use the phrase accessibility, that's what we mean.
Yeah, it's like the ability to access something.
Yes, it's quite simple.
Well, it is.
It's in the word.
Yeah, it is. It's totally in the word, right? Except it's switched around. So we think accessibility, and we make that probably harder than it needs to be.
Yeah.
The concept behind it is these people need to have the ability to access something, right? So, or so do we all. So anyway.
So what are we in particular bringing access to? Well, we have barriers in society. A barrier is anything that stops, impedes, prevents, or causes difficulty for a person from fully participating in aspects of society. Now, most people, when they think of barriers, they're physical ones. They're in our architecture and our built environment. And of course, those are a large barrier to people with disabilities, but there's also organizational or systemic barriers, or information and communication barriers. Attitudinal is an interesting one, because that is probably the largest barrier to people with disabilities.
Well, that goes back to your slide, right, of the lady in the wheelchair. So our attitude towards her is obviously she has a disability, so we're going to try and do things, take care of her, make a wheelchair ramp, whatever the case may be. But now, as I go through your point on attitudinal, what's our attitude towards people with hearing or speaking or mental disability or whatever? It's, seen and not heard, or whatever the term is, right? Like, if you don't know, you don't know, right? Tree falls in the forest, nobody's there, it didn't fall, or did it? So,
a perfect example of that we'll go back to the person with the communication disability who had a stroke, but the mental faculties are working just fine. A lot of people will assume because of the speech, there's a cognitive aspect to it as well. So they're making assumptions that this person has cognitive disabilities,
Right.
Based on the way they carry themselves.
Okay. So therefore, they may not have the mental capacity to be able to build the bridge or do whatever the job is, and yet fully mentally capable.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe even more so than some of the people who are quote able-bodied or whatever.
Yeah, for all we know, that person's a very apt architect and can design a city. And, that person's not getting the fair shake that the rest of us are because he can't convey his ideas verbally.
Okay. Information and communication. I've been listening on the radio. There's been commercials about, from the Canadian government actually, about the Canadian Disability Allowance, I think, or something. And they started out, hey, I'm 30 years old and I'm totally healthy. And then when I'm 50, I have something really bad happens and now I have a disability. So I guess that's probably part of trying to change the message, right? But how do we help you, or what are we missing? Because obviously we're not getting messages like largest minority, community in the world is people who have disabilities. So talk a bit about that. What's the barriers in terms of information and communication?
Well, when we in the accessibility field talk about information and communication, this comes down to sharing information through alternative means such as Braille, large print.
Okay.
And in the office environment, we produce reports and have charts and graphs, so there's a nice picture there. But if we don't use alternate text in our documents, then a person with a visual disability who may not be able to see that chart or graph doesn't know what it is. So they're disadvantaged because of that.
Okay, so I'm thinking about it in a completely reverse way, right? I'm thinking about more of the communication side of you guys communicating, and here I'm on the wrong rail. Now, how do we go about that? Like I notice in elevators now and stuff, they'll often have Braille, right, where the numbers are. So what can we do? Do you think then that has to become standards within companies, or do we just need to become more aware of the fact that if we have people within our organizations who have these things, we then need to be, let's provide this for you? Is that more? Because I don't know that everybody can do Braille, but you should if you have that side of things, I guess, in your business.
Yeah, for sure. There's other ways to convey things as well. If we go back to reports, if a company produces that report in a format which is compatible with screen readers, then the computer will read it to them,
right,
which is, again, the importance of the alt text,
right,
which will describe what that image is and the details in it.
Yeah, for which we already have. I mean, you can watch TV stations that say it's described video or whatever, obviously for people.
Yes, so we just need to come up with alternative means of conveying information other than written text.
Okay, great. Thanks for explaining that, because like I said, I'm on a different track than you were. So there you go, right? I mean,
that's why I exist.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so we kind of laid out what disability is, what accessibility is, and what barriers we're reaching. So let's bring that together in the business case to build physically accessible environments and create places where people with disabilities can participate. Canadians with disabilities represent 14% of consumer spending, or $164 billion annually. And that's anticipated to grow to 21%, or $316 billion annually by 2030.
Third of $1 trillion.
It's a lot. So what does that mean? with 20 to 21% of the population projected to have a disability by 2030, from a marketing perspective, a barrier to a person with a disability is going to be a barrier to business activities and profit.
So there's your economic argument that you started off with. I mean, it's there, right? It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
$1/3 of $1 trillion.
Yeah, and these statistics come from the Conference Board of Canada,
Okay.
who in 2018 conducted the business case to build physically accessible environments.
Okay, so I think that's important too, right? This is not, no offense, Ron, but it's not like tailored accessibility says, that you're getting this right from Conference Board, just getting it from StatsCan or whatever. And I'm sure the American numbers are similar.
They did a 6-year study.
Okay.
And they crossed their T's and dotted their I's. And a lot of their information was based on census material from 2012.
Yeah, interesting that we're having census issues here in the province of Alberta. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But you can see how important that information is. It's not just about finding out, how old you are and where you live or whatever. But if they're getting that kind of information and then you stop doing that, you're going to cut. Well, that's just it's a 1/3 of the population, Ron. I can't. I mean, it's a lot of people. So.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is now all old information from 10 years ago.
Really? Okay.
So it's obviously snowballed from that.
Yeah. How? That's a good question, Matt. You're a good point. So I'll ask the question. Like, how often do governments and stuff go through this and statistics and update this? Is it, you're saying a 6-year study, so I imagine there's probably another 6-year study going on right now, and then it gets released.
Yeah, it's not often enough.
Okay.
It's hard to track disabilities without this being more common in StatsCan questionnaires.
Okay.
We do need to get more statistics more frequently.
Okay.
At least I feel that's necessary.
Yeah. I'm looking at it and thinking the same thing. So, and I'm not even in the business.
So, yeah, there's obviously because of the barriers that exist, there's a shortage of quality employment opportunities for people with disabilities, and because of that, many of them have to rely on government programs and funds to cover their cost of living.
Okay.
And that's a very unfortunate thing.
I think we have that here. I mean, there's programs all over the place. I think it's AISH or something, right, in Alberta. Yeah. Okay. And that's like an income supplement type of program.
Right.
Okay. But they don't make a lot of income. I don't know.
I mean, it supplements people who are able to generate a second source of income, but for a lot of people, that's their only source of income.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's an unfortunate thing.
Okay.
So the reason we bring that up is that with improvements to workplace access, it would allow over 500,000 Canadians with disabilities to work more hours, increasing GDP by $16.8 billion annually by 2030.
17 billion.
Pretty much 17 billion. And that's
give or take between friends, right? I mean, but so we're already talking about an increasing. I think I'm reading this slide. We just talked about 20% increasing to like 1/3 of $1 trillion or whatever. This is over and above that. If we provided the accessibility for 500,000 more people, now we're talking about an even further economic benefit, right? And a further hit, or not hit, but impact on the GDP, right? I mean, you're already impacting it by, roughly 1/3 of $1 trillion using my math. Well, this definitely puts you over 1/3 of $1 trillion when you add that.
So
incredible.
This affects everything from microeconomics all the way to macro.
Okay.
And it's certainly on us to take the steps to make our environments and policies and so on more accessible for people with disabilities. So by creating those accessible environments and empowering people with disabilities to make the shift from our economic load to full participation in our economic engine. I mean, we're really, this is something our governments really need to grab onto. The cost of maintaining social programs is quite substantial and affects every one of us as taxpayers. You know, if we can make more accessible environments and get people earning their own money, they want to. There's just no outlet for them to, or very few outlets to actually enter the workforce in a meaningful way for them to be self-sustaining.
I almost think about it, or maybe this term already exists, but the economics of empowerment, right? So the economics of empowerment is different than a social program, right? If we look at social programs as a cost, as a thing, as something that's, you know, we got to do, we got to take care of it. Where if you look at it, the economics of empowering these people to be able to be active, full members in society, that you don't even pay attention to the disability, by empowering them. I mean, the numbers just speak for themselves, right? And I mean, that's obviously why you do what you do. But I mean, the message needs to get out there.
Yeah, so. Yeah. The accessibility item. I mean, a lot of businesses are concerned about, you know, the customer side of the counter.
Yeah.
But we seriously need to have a hard look at the staff side of the counter and making that accessible for those folks to participate in the economy.
Right. Wheelchair ramp is great going into the Starbucks, but if half the staff at the Starbucks are struggling with disabilities and they're not being cared for, got a problem, right? You got it.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, one of the things that I like to tell companies that, you know, they're like, yeah, I've got a ramp and I've got an accessible washroom. And I mean, there's more to it than that. Is your business accessible? Means, can I access the other things? Because quite frankly, and I joke with them often, well, it's a joke, but not really. People with disabilities don't go there to pee. It's far more accommodating for them at home.
Right.
You need to make your entire business accessible because that's what they actually go for.
Yeah. I think like I love that. That needs to go on a meme or something. But I'm thinking about that though realistically, and you've got Fred or Mary or whatever sitting in the meeting in the boardroom, and after talking about some of these sort of unknown or, you know, hidden disabilities, they're sitting there thinking, you know, I got to keep up appearances that I know what I'm doing or that I'm, you know, but they may not even see the graph. They may not even be able to really know, and yet they're going through that because there's that concept of being ashamed or, you know, whatever. We have to get beyond that so that people aren't crying out for help. They're just saying, I need help and we need to do this or that. And they become, like you say, a fully active participant in the economy and in our corporations.
Yeah, we have to normalize it.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, there's the word normal. We talk about what the new normal is. Now this needs to become part of the new normal, I would say.
For sure. Yeah. So the closing thought, every human being has the capacity to contribute something of value to society. So the issue is not whether one is abled or disabled, but the barriers in our environments that are disabling.
Wow. So that's, you've summed that up great. That's really what we need to start to focus on. And what you've just said is about empowering people to be a productive part of society. It's not even being productive. I think because they're doing their best to be productive, but it's to be an empowered and essential part of our society, and realizing that their disability is just something, right? It is what it is, right? All of us have something. We're all like Nemo, right? The little fish, right? We all have our small fin, and that's the part I think that we forget. Our disabilities are things that make us different, are things that, you know, impede maybe what we do, aren't necessarily noticeable to somebody that's in the wheelchair, but in a sense, we all have something that makes us unique, but also gives us that little thing that's just not perfect, right? And I think if we begin to see people like that, but the economic benefit and impact is just massive. These statistics are really eye-opening, Ron. And I can't thank you enough for being part of our video series with us. Tailored, TAYLORED, accessibility.com, right? Go there. If you've got issues within your own company or organization, Ron's waiting to talk to you. And let's hope we can all focus on some of these numbers and the things that you've taught us today, and that we can now start to be more empowering to our fellow citizens that may have a disability, visible or not. So, thanks, Ron. Really appreciate it.
No problem, Chris. Anytime.
You bet.